challenge, you know, I go back from a regional perspective, the challenge again also with the states was that we each have different priorities, different needs. Jamaica is heavily dependent on tourism. So there was a real push to open our borders back as quickly as possible. Trinidad, on the other hand, is not so much dependent on tourism. Their borders remain closed for several months. You know, I mean, almost a year their borders were closed. So again, trying to implement strategies across the region was a little bit different. Barbados had a similar priority like us. They're heavily dependent on tourism. So they wanted to open up, you know, as quickly as possible. So there was that to navigate.
And how can you compromise these conflicting priorities?
Well, I think what happened certainly for COVID is that each individual government just went ahead and had to make their own decisions. It comes back to a comment that Thomas just made, in that sometimes these decisions that were made, it's government thinking to the next election. You know, how am I going to satisfy my constituents that I'm elected the next time around? But it really came down to each state saying, you know, this is what's important to me. Let's get it done.
Great, thank you. Catalin, how is the situation in Central Asia? Is there any collaboration among different authorities?
We are working to build this collaboration. Traditionally used to be the former Soviet states, after that CIS. But now what we are trying to do is coagulate the power that we have in terms of economies. Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan are the leading economies in the region of Caspian and Central Asia. So practically we are trying to work together to make sure that in terms of capability to help the other colleagues from states with less resources is important. And right now we are putting in place mechanisms, regional collaboration mechanisms, to make sure that everyone is at the same level, because the traffic also pattern is towards the region. Of course, we are expecting more traffic coming from outside the region, but what we want to serve first is our citizens. And because of that, we start some projects. We sign a declaration of ACTAO in trying to put 7 states from the region all together to collaborate in terms of security and facilitation. We are working now to build also on project in having representativity in bigger fora, international fora, like ICAO. We are building our own, let's say, civil aviation committee. You have ECAC, LACAC, AFCAC and ACAO. We are trying to build our Eurasian Civil Aviation Commission that will have 11, 12, 13 states, maybe more. But what we are trying to do is to have a say and to show to the bigger aviation community and the global aviation environment that we are existing there. We have developed a lot in terms of aviation. It's one of the youngest fleet in the region. So we are trying to do our best to promote our best practices and to work as a whole to help each other, because at the end what we need is to be linked, be connected with the rest of the world, and to bring added value for the global aviation. We are between, especially right now in terms of connectivity, we are between China and Europe, the former Silk Road, the former transport corridors. It's quite challenging in terms of all the supply chain, and what we are trying to do with aviation is to build this bridge and to try to be complementary to what it means for economy. But without a strong regulatory system, you cannot attract business, you cannot put in place mechanisms that will let people come and say, let's build together all this. And Kazakhstan, Central Asia, it's a place to be, because over there you have resources and enough capabilities to know that your aircraft is safe, your pilots are well treated, and everyone is playing by the rules. And because of that, we are right now working together to build this structure. We've signed a memorandum of cooperation with international organization, with IATA, with ACI, just to use their products, for example, IOSA or ISEGO. We are trying to use this partnership to strengthen our capability to do it, because no CAA has enough resources to do it by itself, but you have the industry, and that's why for me it's very important to have the feedback from the industry, to know what we can do to work together and to build this partnership that at the end will have us succeeded, while having that, regulator, industry oversight, behavior. Keep in mind that all these states used to be in a very, let's say, high hierarchic zone. The first thing I've done when I arrived there, I said, look, we are not anymore the policeman. CAA is not a policeman. You are the partners with the industry. We need to educate. We need to work together to explain what does it mean, a piece of legislation. And this should be the approach that we should have in our collaboration and cooperation with the industry. So we are trying to do our best, but for me the only response is regional collaboration and strengthen our partnership capabilities with the industry, because this is what it matters at the end, to work together to develop and to bring to the people the economic benefits of aviation.
And being an expatriate and based on your own experience from ICAO and Europe, what are the lessons to be learned for that regional role in Central Asia?
I think that, first of all, what I like in Kazakhstan was they had the great vision of bringing expats to run the CAA. One important thing is they need the experience of highly expertise coming from abroad, but also to protect the technical level by the political pressure and the political level that always is coming with some influence. So this is extremely important. They had the capability to see and to have this visionary project to put in place over there, but also in this context to realize that you cannot do it by yourself. You need partnership, and even bringing someone from abroad to run your CAA shows the level of understanding that you cannot be alone. We need to work together. The exposure that you give to your country through the people that you bring into the country and the partnership that you have with the global framework brings you added value as a player over there and as a contributing member of aviation community.
Thank you. And Thomas, my understanding is that A4E has lines of different sizes and belonging to different business models, perhaps more heterogeneous compared, let's say, to other groupings. So how easy or how difficult is it to manage an organization like A4E, especially in the post-COVID-19 period?
It's very easy. As long as we pay the that's the one thing. As long as they pay the bill, everyone pays the bill. That's not the. Yes, it's a highly competitive business. If you look at the ecosystem, the airlines have been truly liberalized. So and rightly so. Europe had the idea we need competition in the market. More people need to be able to fly at affordable rates, more connections. And it's been a huge success the last 2 decades, 15 years in particular, the single aviation market. We're not there yet. I think there's still some work to be done. But to come back to your question, yes, of course. Whether it's, if you're an ultra or low coster and then the network carrier, you have lots of hybrid type, I would say, groups like IAG has actually is a good example of representing both low cost, the classic network carrier, but what is an IG? For IG, for me, is more like a hybrid, represents sort of a hybrid organization. But also the other groups have made attempts also and are moving towards more a hybrid position. That is also thanks to the competition that is coming in the market, and we know the big names who are also very, very vocal. But that's the reason why I took the job. Initially I thought, and I'm not sure I told you this story, but when I came from UTC, I was approached by Lufthansa, by the then head of the Lufthansa office in Brussels, the EU liaison office, and she says, we want you for this job, because you come from the OEMs and you don't come from an airline, so we trust you. You're neutral, which is already a good example about the thinking. Then I said, well, how is this going to work with, you've got the Michael O'Leary's on the one hand, and it was still Karen LeColl, who was CEO of EasyJet on the one hand, and then you've got Air France KLM Group, the Lufthansa Group, and IAG. Willie Walsh was still in charge of IAG as the founding members. And then I said, well, can I please see them together? Can I see them in a room behind closed doors, and then I'll decide whether I take the job or not. And it's good I did it, because and it was really fascinating to see, on the top 4 or 5 issues, they said, Thomas, this is what you would like to work on. And I said, well, why? Explain me why it's so important to you. And they were all on the same page. If it's about, a lot of these issues are driven. We work on cost, trying to lower cost, trying to avoid more cost, in very much related to the supply chain, to be honest. I mean, you look at ATC cost efficiency or lack of it. Airport charges, Big Dan was still sort of a big issue, and the Commission is sort of trying to kill that a little bit. But also aviation taxes, that has never gone away, and I don't think it will ever go away. The national fuel taxes or ticket taxes, taxes for noise at airports, local taxes. So they were really focusing on everyday things, very structural things, and it's whether you're low cost or a network carrier or whatever you call yourself, you all have the same problem. The problem of lack of capacity, for instance, if you want to grow. This is something we've seen, and we see now again. We saw it until 2019, and then COVID happened, and then you think, well, now the NSPs, and they were encouraged by the European regulators to invest in the network, to hire more ADCOs, because that's what they said, we don't have the capacity. Well, you have town now, with low traffic, you can disrupt it, probably no one will see it, because no one's flying, so do your job. And unfortunately, most of them haven't done so. So what you see now, and Eurocontrol has mentioned it several times, because Eurocontrol can sometimes take these political statements as well. They said, well, traffic is growing, which is good. We're up to, this year, we're going to be up to 90% of 2019 levels. But if it weren't for the lack of capacity, we've seen disruptions in the summer, but if we weren't for that, over the course of the year, at the level of the airspace level, then we would reach 100%, no doubt. The demand is there. So what we see now in Europe is that the demand is higher than the supply. We can't follow, or the network can't follow, the infrastructure isn't there yet. So all of that to say that this is a challenge for all of my members, wherever you come from. This makes A4E very strong, because we are true, and by the way, we also have Cargolux, as a top cargo airline in Europe. We represent the entire landscape, and this is why the European Commission in particular likes us so much. When Director General wants to have some idea, they give us a call and say, do you think this is a good idea? Let's sit together also with IATA. IATA has different challenges. They have the global membership. While if you need to work in Brussels, you need to be European, you need to have European priorities. But put IATA and A4E together, we're actually a very, very strong team. And I must say, it works very well. For us, the only way is up. I think our members want us to do more. And that goes both, I think, for IATA in Brussels as A4E in Brussels. And I think we'll need to, just looking at Tassos, maybe we need to talk to Dimitris, the CEO of Aegean. Last week we had the CEOs in town, and they really want us to do more, because there's more challenges coming up, and it's not only about sustainability or decarbonization, which is of course the challenge for all of the stakeholders, where we need more collaboration, but it's really about facilitation. How can we accommodate? How can the market, the system, the infrastructure accommodate the growth that we see, that we have seen this summer? We're still seeing it this winter. And our CEOs are very optimistic when they look at the bookings for Q1 and Q2. Personally, I was always like, touch wood, we're entering to a recession, but we don't see it. We can't see it, which is good news. But then, the supply chain needs to follow, and that's where we see the problems.
Thank you. And now one of the things that I mentioned in the previous discussion was about leverage, and we discussed with Tassos' situation of a small airline, for example. And what about the challenges in your area of the world? Because if you are EU, if you are US, it's not difficult to be heard. Everybody wants to hear you. But coming from another region like yours, how can you effectively communicate the key messages not only to your regional audience, but also to a wider one?
Well, one thing that fora like these really brings home for me. Because you look at it, you know, you have the small players, medium and the large players, whether it be industry, whether it be regulators, service providers. We have a lot of common issues. And so for me, it's always a challenge that why can't we just get it right, get it together and get it right. And many of the issues are common. But a very good question in terms of, you know, from Jamaica and the region, the Caribbean region, how do we get our voices heard? We do that by participating in things like these, participating in regional events, international events, but not just participate, but take leadership roles in those groups as well, to bring you know, the needs, the challenges, the uniqueness as well of the states, and that was also a very key part of the government of Jamaica's decision to go up for election to the Council of ICAO, because we saw it necessary to be able to have that voice of small island developing states be a part of the decision-making process. And so we look at it not just from, you know, we're representing Jamaica, but we're representing the region, we're representing small island developing states. That's how we need to leverage, you know, those kinds of opportunities that present itself. Also, and we have seen it with our international partners, Transport Canada, the UKCAA, EASA, the FAA, a number of their residents, their citizens travel to the Caribbean. You know, so there's this real push. Certainly we had the UKCAA, Transport Canada, and FAA, but more recently EASA has come on board because they recognize that there is quite a bit of traffic coming into the region. So they have taken an interest as well to ensure that the states, you know, continue to comply, improve their levels of effective implementation, safety and security standards. And then, you know, we have the new things that are emerging. Environment is a big issue that, you know, has now taken center stage as well. Sustainability, you know. So just to answer the question, is for us to get involved, continue to get involved at the necessary forum, put ourselves in leadership positions to make decisions, be a part of that process.
Great, thank you. And likewise in your case, Catalin, how can you get your voice heard at a wider audience?
As I said before, and as Nari said it very, very well, we need to partnership, we need to be more visible in the international context. If also at the technical level, as soon as I came, I started sending people participating in working groups in different technical conferences, and to try to have a word and to try to have your own opinion, to bring your own experience, and to understand what is the context and how your other colleagues at the table can help you, and how they can understand your situation, your position, and what are your own challenges in the region. Also to create this regional strength, bringing more countries all together. You know, the UN system, the ICAO system, is one country, one vote, and when you have a certain weight in terms of number of votes, number of countries, then you can also have your role to play and have your voice heard. So it's important to participate, to be able to be involved at the regional and international level, and to make sure that people are, because by definition aviation is international, but also a very collaborative industry, so you cannot exist without each other. So people have naturally tendency to help. How can I help? How can come together to solve this problem? But you need to tell them what's my problem, okay? What I'm facing right now, what is my challenge. So that's why we need to be always there, and not to stay, you build your own system inside, but you need to go outside and to make your voice heard. And I think there are different mechanisms, but the most important is to be in and to participate in events like here, to bring people in your region. And by the way, in next April we will have to organize a conference together with Costas and other partners, and we are all invited, by the way. But we are trying to showcase what we are doing, what we can do, and how together we can build more added value for the whole aviation chain. But it's important to be present. It's important to be there and to make your voice heard.
Great, thank you. And Thomas, you did mention before about A4E collaborating with other stakeholders in Europe. What about with similar organizations in other regions of the world, like A4A, for example, or in other parts? How do you actually collaborate towards promoting your common agenda, let's say?
That's a very good question, because originally the mandate for A4E, and by the way, there's no formal connection, not even a marketing agreement with A4A. So we arrived at the organization and said, oh, it's going to be A4E. I didn't know that it was an A4A, but it's going to be A4E, fine. We worked very well together with them, and I saw that Abdul was also in the original program, so we usually meet each other at international fora, when there's an IATA event or something, you know, that's where we see each other. Now, originally A4E, from my board, the CEOs basically said, you need to focus on the European single market. You know, this is your job. Don't get involved with discussions with the Gulf carriers or with China or even with the US. So when I met Nick Calio, he was the first leader I saw from, you know, the CEO from A4A. He came to Brussels, and he's from Italian descendants, as you can imagine. So he took me to the best Italian restaurant in Brussels. So he impressed me, and so he's a great guy. He's a former lobbyist with Citi, so he has a financial background. And he said, you know, he gave me his history, why he joined A4A and so on. And so we were but he said, look, you know, I know your mandate is limited, and obviously also limited resources compared to what Washington has in terms of resources. And he said, but if we can work together on ad hoc issues with the FAA, EASA, you know, if there are issues, maybe we can work together. And this is exactly how we do it. So we do it pragmatically on an ad hoc basis, mainly with the US, because we've had, I would say, from our membership, we've had many issues, and from technical nature between EASA, FAA, safety-related issues. But also in the case of Brexit, where I did not have a mandate for reasons you can imagine. If you look at my membership, we still have a couple of those English guys on board, and we keep them on board, and they can stay on board according to my statute, so there's no problem. But you know, there was a bit of, I would say, different opinions within my membership with regards to Brexit and how it should be pushed against or for. So I totally stayed out of that. So it was easy when I had questions from journalists. What about Brexit? No comments. You know, talk to my members. But there also we take a pragmatic approach. So whenever we see now, there's been some research lately about the results of Brexit, what you see at the network manager level, Eurocontrol, but also EASA, we would take a very pragmatic approach and say, for instance, you know, we don't get involved in the politics, but you cannot ignore UK being still the largest, from a traffic perspective, the largest market in Europe. Whether it's EU or not, so we need to take a pragmatic approach. So this is, although my mandate is limited, I see that actually step by step, before even knowing it, through some technical dossiers, we actually are talking and reaching out to our colleagues in the region. So that's positive. It was a little bit less positive, I must admit, thinking about A4A and the whole decarbonization discussion, which we also had with IATA, when we launched our Destination 2050 report, which is a roadmap how European aviation, not just A4E, we took the initiative a couple of years ago, but we got ACI Europe involved, CANSO, the ANSPs, the OEMs and European regional airlines. So the 5 partner European aviation associations got together to fund a study on a roadmap how to get to net zero by 2050, perfectly in line with the European ambition, of course, which we know today is the Green Deal and so on, and Fit for 55 followed that a couple of months later on. So we launched it February last year, and I can tell you that, you know, Washington wasn't very happy, you know, A4A, because they really were still very much on one side. Of course, they feared that the US carriers were going to be regulated, were going to be involved, and they did not like our proactive position. Basically, what we said is European aviation saying, look, the train has left the Green Deal, so you might as well jump on that train before it's completely left, jump on that train and show that we are committed in writing, up to the level of our CEOs, to commit ourselves how we're going to get to net zero 2050. It's going to cost a lot of money, etc., but we can do it and we will do it. And this is something we had to do as a European sector because we knew the regulation was coming. So better than to wait and to complain and to deny, it's better to be proactive as a lobbyist. That's really the golden rule. Recognize it and try to make the best of it. And because of that, we as an entire European aviation sector today, we have a lot of credibility with the green NGOs when it's about decarbonization. We don't have to be defensive. We have a story. Everyone knows about it. We don't have to complain. Well, we can complain about the cost, but politically speaking, we have become extremely strong thanks to that. But that's sometimes where most regional associations, when it was launched in February, it was very much criticized by them. But today they're our friends again because 2 months later, IATA launched its roadmap. Very similar. And we know that IATA didn't have an easy job with Willy Walsh trying to get it approved at his board. But IATA approved it, and it's basically looking at the same roadmap at the global level, including Corsia, of course. And then you see that, we're friends again. Actually, you were right to do this. We were the first ones. It was quite painful for some. But you see, the relationship is very important, but it doesn't mean that we always agree. We try to work together as well as we can. Of course, the easiest for me, I'm very much a pragmatist, as you may feel. Even if I don't have a mandate, I will try to work case by case, where it makes sense, where we have win-win. If we don't have win-win, we just move on.
Great. Thank you so much. Can we have time for a few questions from the audience?
Andrea, please. Again, I will do the same question as asked the previous panel. From your perspective, we're about to work more closely in international organizations. You represent the regulator. Sometimes there is the governments from one side and the rest of the industry from the other side. Of course, you are not the examples because you come from the industry, but in the council there are some people that come from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, nothing to do with aviation. Then, how you see this kind of cooperation between international level? And of course, you represent regional, but you said about IATA. But how you see it, and what is your wish list if this go ahead? Then, what you expect, and how you can help, because you are the government.
Well, I think any opportunity that presents itself whereby common interests can be determined, defined, and the commitment given to work towards it should readily be embraced. And not just getting into an MOU or an agreement or just for the sake of doing it. It's a nice piece of paper, a nice document to have sitting there, but to actually execute what it is that we've set out for. And so definitely the commitment. I can see it certainly in this room. And COVID has obviously there are a lot of negatives with COVID. I'll just digress just a little bit. In 2019, I had the great opportunity of being the president of the ICAO Assembly, and at that time we spoke about all the issues that were happening. Of course, safety and security, the environment really dominated that assembly. Nobody knew that 5 months later we would have been faced with this that nobody envisioned. And so while those objectives of the assembly certainly were still very important, we all had to come together to address this. And it was said in the earlier panel that it's probably the first time that the world had a common objective. How is it that we're going to address this? So, so I come back to the question that has been asked. We need to embrace this opportunity. All players, industry, regulators, other agencies, governments. There's a thrust right now. I don't want us, we are coming out of the pandemic, to lose that momentum, to get things done. So it's really the commitment, but whatever we have agreed to, whatever we have signed to, let's get it done. So action is really where we're going to see the results.
In terms of how I see it, it's, and based on my experience, we used to have in ICAO, it's still the case. ICAO is inviting a member of the industry at the highest level once per year to establish the common goals and try to work and harmonize and support each other's agenda. But it's still government asking the industry to stay in ICAO premises and trying to see how it's working. What is missing here is the equal level of discussion in a neutral place where everyone can express their opinion and their willingness to work together, but at the same level. We are all equal and equal important in this picture. Also, I think it's important in the same way what Ricardo saw as an outcome in an ICAO assembly. It's a regulatory environment. Industry, it's represented, but still it's fully, governmental based and intergovernmental based. So I think that a real discussion with everyone at the same table, everyone being equal as importance, and trying to really solve the issues that are really burning for all of us. We have our specific ones, but what can be solved together as a group will bring the added value of this collaboration. The way it will be set, it will be seen in the future, but a simple fact, put all these people at the table, the highest level, will bring, I think, enough reason to start discussing all the actions that Nari was talking about. You need the plan, you need to be able to understand that we are all equal here and everyone has his part to play in this game, and after that to disseminate to our members, to our part of the industry. But I want to congratulate you for this initiative and to try to work it out. We are supporting 100%.
Thomas?
The question was exactly...
Well, you represent the regional organizations. I mean, it's but you cooperate, with other regions, as you just mentioned about the A4A and the others. But also, the important is in the global, let's say differently. The topics that are in Europe sometimes different in other parts of the world. Then in the US they have different issues and so on. Then the thing is how you see an international organization that will be representing all the interest from all the part of the aviation chain, how it would be add value for A4E. And what is your wish list from this organization?
Yeah, the wish list, I think, that's obviously a very good question, a tough one to answer, but what we see in Europe with the wave of new regulations coming to us, and again, I apologize, but I'm sort of say this with my EU hat on, with the new Commission coming in 24 and new European Parliament. So let's try to touch wood as much as possible. It's a bit difficult to say, but we see already a lot of a new wave of regulation coming out. Not only sustainability relating 50-55, but the international context is for us very important. There is so much we can learn from the other regions. For instance, the development and availability of SAF. We know that the US is way ahead, including because they're right incentive systems in terms of production of SAF. So what happens is that you'll see that many European carriers, the long-haul guys flying to the US, they will uplift SAF in the US, simply because it's going to be available and most probably will not be available for a long time in Europe. So it's this dialogue internationally. I'm just thinking about the US market, but also other markets where we can actually learn a lot from each other. I'm also thinking, for instance, production of e-fuels going forward. We will need a lot of renewable electricity. If you're looking at countries in Africa, but also in the Middle East and in Asia, they have a lot of opportunities because of solar to there locally produce SAF. So that's a business opportunity for fuel suppliers. But this is a good example in terms of the ecosystem, so we need them as well. So there's so much we can learn from the other regions, and this is why I think international network, not only an IATA or what we have in ICAO, but international network with people who are very committed to their region, to see how we can learn from each other. I think, just to finish on that, one of our top challenges is decarbonization, how we will do it, but also at the same time keep a level playing field. Because there is a big danger with the humongous cost, I'm talking hundreds of billions of euros cumulative by 2050, coming to the airlines. Someone will need to pay for it, and we cannot charge the passenger for everything, so we'll need to absorb a lot of cost there if we don't get the right incentives. So how are you going to do that? And a competitive or a level playing field amongst the regions needs to be continuous work, because I know there's a big debate also at the international level. So we have global competition, we have very strong European competition, but global competition as well. And that's of course the tricky bit, right? So how do we find common ground in terms of when we talk about competition? What do we mean? Protectionism, incentives only. What you see now in the US is clearly a move towards protectionism for green energy sources and so on. And the reaction of Europe, where actually aviation is actually part of. People don't talk about it, they talk about high-level discussions, but we're actually part of that discussion as well. So, yes, welcome any initiative that can promote, I would say, real down-to-earth discussions and people who are really committed and who ideally don't have to talk for months about wonderful ideas, but never get to a solution. That would be my plea, so good luck with that.
Please.
Hi Andreas, my name's Kieran and I work for an engine leasing company. Like Catalin, I studied aeronautical engineering as well, and I've always had a very keen interest in how you make things more efficient, more fuel efficiency, make more efficient engines.
Great.
I've paid a lot of attention to the green narrative since 2007, followed it very closely. Carbon emissions, CO2, carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. It is a natural constituent of Earth's atmosphere. So we always hear that aviation is responsible for 2.5% of global anthropogenic carbon emissions, i.e. human-generated fossil fuel or CO2 emissions. But we always just look at that bubble only, we're 2.5%. That's a sliver of the pie chart, it's pretty small. But what about a planetary scale? So I've taken I'm not a climate expert, but I've looked at climate experts' data. And what I've seen is they say that 25 years ago, there were 380 parts per million of CO2 in Earth's atmosphere. They've said in that 25 years, it's gone from 380 parts per million to 410 parts per million. So 410 parts per million are 0.041% of the Earth's atmosphere. It's pretty small. That's a 30 parts per million increase in 25 years. 30 parts per million is 0.003% of Earth's atmosphere. So we've got 30 parts per million. Aviation's responsible for 2.5% of that 30 parts per million. So you've got 0.003% of Earth's atmosphere multiplied by 2.5%, and you end up at 0.00075% of Earth's atmosphere. Now that's over 25 years, that's aviation's contribution. If we assume that's an average over the 25 years, we can divide that 0.00075 by 25. We get 0.00025%. That's aviation's annual contribution of CO2 to Earth's atmosphere. Now, we all can hear that that's a small number. It's a trace amount. The World Bank Director General or Chairman was asked recently did he believe that carbon emissions was causing climate change. He said he wasn't sure either way. He got harangued and harassed and harried to step down for questioning climate change. Now, I've actually found climate scientists, this is my own view on it, but I've found climate scientists who are actually saying they're not convinced on it, and that there's other agendas there basically. Right, big agenda I see is it's tax. How is an airline meant to buy more fuel efficient aircraft and engines when it's getting taxed more and more on top of it, right? But those numbers, you can fact check them. I'm happy to share those numbers, and you can double check them. But I'm not convinced. And we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars coming out of airlines' pockets, coming out of passengers' pockets. I'm just not convinced.
Can I have a clarification?
Yeah.
If airports are 5% of the 2.5%, what's the number?
5% of the 2.5%? There's so many zeros out here all night. It's going to be very small.
No, but that's a great. If I could just, that's a great statement, and that's the statements we've been making for the past. Well, haven't been that long over the past 10, 15 years. So But that's not the issue. The issue is politics now.
Yes.
And certainly in Europe, as I've mentioned before, it's gotten really dogmatic. And in the beginning, it was the Greens,
Yeah.
or people from the left, or the wackos or whatever.
Yeah.
But now it's the complete, almost I would say, there are certain parties. If you look at the European Parliament,
Yeah.
90% of the people, you cannot say something that aviation, is negligible as far as carbonization is concerned.
Yeah.
The same discussion on non-CO2, by the way. That's the next. That's already they're trying to put it in. Oh, what about contrails and not? So scientific evidence today, we've come to this stage, at least in Europe, that in the whole decarbonization or climate change debate, let me call it this way.
Yeah.
Talked about climate change. That's not the issue. That train has left. There's legislation, so we need to deal with it. It is too late. It's there, and yeah. Even our CEOs for the last couple of years, there's a race, a PR race, and saying, oh, I'm the greenest, no, I'm the greenest, I've got most of the modern aircraft, so I'm the best. So it's become part of the PR towards the passenger. It's becoming a marketing tool.
Yeah.
And even that Europe wants to regulate, they want to have an eco label. I mean, well, we can talk offline. This is really ridiculous, but you can't say it's ridiculous because on an eco label, what do you have against an eco label? So what people think, what politicians think, oh yeah, I have that for my fridge, which is huge success in Europe.
Yeah.
But it's also completely wrong. People miseducated. So you buy a fridge. Why you buy a fridge? It says A+. What does that mean, A+? People have no idea, but it's green, it says A+, so I guess it's good. I'll buy the fridge.
Yeah, exactly.
And the same person who leaves the door open for half an hour in this wonderful fridge. So, and it's the same with the eco label. It's purely they're going to base this eco label on the technology, on the aircraft, which is registered as you would as a passenger. You buy a ticket online, and then the system needs to know the pilot that day is going to fly that aircraft, and we assume calculations that he or she is going to fly that route. So there's a lot of assumptions, and the regulator says we don't care. We need an eco label, and we're going to take these assumptions for real. And they're going to go to the airline, and it's going to become a standard. It was supposed to be best practices. We supported best practices. How can we have anything against an eco label for the passenger, right? So it's if people have more trust, if they think, they have the choice to fly green, we give them the choice, fine. But it will become a standard, a European standard, right? And this is how far we are. This is how dogmatic the whole discussion. So it's crazy. And we had a meeting last week with some MEPs, members of the European Parliament, and there was one CEO amongst them. I'm not going to say the name, but who apparently doesn't come to Brussels too often, because he was sitting there like, this is unreal. He was actually laughing. He was laughing not because he thought it was funny, but he was so shocked. And he came out and said, how can you work with these people? And our chair, when we came out of the meeting, who was used to deal with politicians and people in Brussels, and he said, you set up this meeting to get a bonus, didn't you? Because we know now how hard this is, what kind of job you have in order to talk to these people. And no, so it wasn't, but just to say that, so people lost complete track of realism as far as when it goes about decarbonization. And so you have choices. You have the choice to say, well, we can go to Brussels, or we should have gone to Brussels 3 years ago and said, this guy knows exactly what he's talking about. And it used to work with people in the administration. But then when politics got involved, I call it the Greta Thunberg effect. In the beginning, people thought, she's, this poor kid, what she's saying, and I think the parents, there must be some history. How is this possible? Just ignore it. And no, I think we made a choice not to ignore it.
I would question her father's policy of not bringing his child to North America on aviation, like on a transatlantic flight, which is the safest mode of transport, but instead brought her across the North Atlantic in stormy winter seas at 30 foot yacht, which is highly dangerous.
That's fine.
But he'll risk her life for a message. But he's not.
But that's where sort of the mania took over, and that you cannot say this politically. It's very incorrect. And so you have a choice: either you can continue to disagree, and give the wonderful scientific evidence, or you can say, well, if I'm part of this world, if I want to change something, if I want to get some realism and try to limit the damage, I need to be part of this discussion. And we chose to do that, and it was the right decision because we have legislation.
Seat at the table.
We have a seat at the table, and we are credible now because, well, we have committed. We will need to. We'll have to do it anyway.
Have you noticed that in Sweden they voted out the left, like
Kieran, we need to...
Oh,
No,
sorry.
it's a good.
Just if I may, just one comment on that. I think, because I fully agree with what you say, the next step is actually putting up the economic impact, because this has a cost, right? And, you know, at the end of the day, people, the end consumer, the taxpayer is going to pay for this, because, you know, you have private shareholders, I have private shareholders, no investment is going to take place unless it's a fair return, right? So I think at Brussels, wherever, they need to start thinking about, is it subsidies, is it lowering of taxes? This should be the discussion now. If you want us to achieve this, you should start thinking of how you're going to fund this. And it's not going to come from the private sector. Obviously, there will be some burden sharing, I agree with you. But you know, the main aim, if you want to achieve these targets, needs to come from the government.
Yeah, it actually goes, just to finish, it goes actually further than that, because it's already too late for that. We know that Europe doesn't have the money, and in these times, we need to invest now, the money. There's not money for aviation. And why is there no money for aviation? Because we have gotten such a bad name. The perception is not only about, you know, we pollute, but it actually, they took it a level higher. And automotive transport used that very smartly. The railways, very smart guys. They started bashing aviation. Why? Not because they hate us, because we actually are partnering with high speed. So we don't have a problem with trains. It's because they just need to get more funding. They want to get more funding to put in the black hole. Railways is one of the most inefficient, economically totally inefficient mode of transport in Europe. It's public, unions, I get that. But then the lobbyists have been smart. So that's a dinner debate. I'm happy to take it offside, but that's why I said, I think IATA and ourselves, we realize now that we need to have, in the next couple of years, a very positive campaign. It's about perception, first of all. Because this is just decarbonization, but the other issue that will come on the table, we have an image problem in Europe, and I think in the US it's totally different, but in Europe we have an image problem as a complete sector, and this is why I'm telling Airbus and Boeing and these guys, you don't want to be vocal on aviation tax? Well, guess what? We won't have the money, or much less money, to buy technology.
Exactly.
And some executives get it, and so, but this brings us together. We're in a crisis, a perception crisis, and we need to fix that first. And this is not about very smart people. This is not rocket science. It's really about spending a lot of money in PR agencies, grassroots campaigns, and then hopefully we can continue to bring more realism in the debate. Because then the passenger will say, "I didn't realize in order to be on time with my flight that you need a single European aviation space." You need all, you know, ground handling, security services, you need capacity at the airports level. You need to actually have fuel available, SAF available. And for me to get on time on my destination, there's all of these things, the back office, I had no idea about. So thanks very much for telling me. So next time my flight is late, and more airlines say, well, excuses, we're late. Not because of our staff, but you know, the French ATC is on strike again, and so there was a rerouting. So we need to communicate better about these things. Then the passenger gets it. The passenger will then be less inclined to, on the EU261, to go to court or to ask for compensation. So it's the bad perception, or the total wrong perception of it's just a flight, it's just a commodity, and you know, it's normal that these flights are on time, and it's normal that the prices are low. No, it's not normal. It's thanks to competition, and it's thanks to a system we need to improve that you'll continue to fly affordably, sustainably, and at many destinations. But in order to do that, the regulators and the politicians need to realize that, you know, we're playing a very dangerous game in Europe. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. I know Jeff has a question, but is it a really quick one?
Yeah, it's a quick one. I just wanted to ask Radu about the situation of SAF in Central Asia, because I just attended a conference in Latin America, but the LATAM CEO, he complained, he said basically the US is putting forward incentives for SAF production, they're doing it very well. Canada is on the same path. Then he said Europe is basically telling people what they need to do. It's not about incentives, but you know, basically a framework on how things need to be done. And he cried over the fact that Latin America could be the largest source of SAF for the world. And he said that there's nothing out there. There's no incentives. Authorities are not really grasping this and telling producers what to do, and there's no interest in production. And he said, we're going to be importing it. Well, we have all the sources. Is there any discussion over, what SAF might be, what approach you might have to SAF in Central Asia?
Central Asia as a whole, not necessarily, but I can tell you about Kazakhstan. We are happy that we have oil and gas, cheap resources, and because of that, SAF for us is something that we are looking at, but because of our commitment to the green, to become more green, more sustainable in terms of our impact. But for real, there are a lot of discussion right now. The industry is going because we have a lot of as I said, refineries and capacity of production over there. So practically we are not necessarily tackling the issue because it might need, we might need this, as I said, we have cheap fuel, but because it might be another way to convince business to come to Kazakhstan, to come to the region, and to incentivize businesses to start developing the network there. We are also committed with our main partners, European Union, United States, and even China and some states of Asia, to go in this direction. So, despite of a strong, let's say, lack of real need today, we will do it because we feel the need to contribute and to be part of the greater community that goes in this direction. So. Especially the conference on April will tackle the production of SAF and what we should do in terms of starting to implement some programs. In terms of incentivizing, maybe we have the capability to be flexible. We are not part of a structure of the bloc like European Union to say no. So we can take the right decision that will facilitate the economic development and growth of our region. So we are looking forward for this, and we are working in developing this, at least to start this discussion and developing the right strategy for the region.
Okay, great. So thank you very much. I think we've